The war in Ukraine shows little sign of slowing, as President Vladimir Putin continues to commit Russian forces to relentless engagements against entrenched Ukrainian defenses. Month after month, the human and material losses accumulate, raising a difficult question. What is the long-term outcome of a campaign that continues to demand so much, yet delivers so little in return? From a strategic standpoint, some analysts argue that the trajectory is already clear. Among them is NATO Admiral Giuseppe Cavo Dragone, who has served as chair of NATO's military committee since January 2025. In remarks to the BBC on November 2nd, Dragone described the conflict as having reached a point of deep stagnation, an operational standstill where continued fighting risks becoming, in his words, a waste of lives. His assessment points to a campaign that has drifted far from its original objectives. What was once envisioned as a swift and decisive operation has instead evolved into a prolonged and grinding contest. Russia's initial strategy, designed to pressure Ukraine through sustained attrition, has produced the opposite effect. Rather than forcing a collapse, it has locked Russian forces into a drawn-out cycle of advances and withdrawals, with no decisive breakthrough in sight. The numbers tell a striking story. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, more than 1.14 million Russian personnel have been killed, injured, or captured between the start of the invasion and November 4th. Equipment losses are equally significant. Over 11,300 tanks have been destroyed or rendered inoperable, alongside approximately 34,250 armored vehicles and more than 66,500 cars and fuel transport units. In the air domain, the challenges continue. Around 1,200 anti-aircraft systems have been neutralized, while 428 aircraft and 346 helicopters have been lost. Additionally, approximately 77,860 unmanned aerial vehicles have been downed. These figures reflect not just isolated setbacks, but a sustained strain on Russia's operational capacity across multiple fronts. Yet the impact of this conflict extends far beyond the battlefield. Financially, the burden has grown heavier with each passing year. Reports indicate that sanctions have frozen roughly $340 billion in Russian reserves. At the same time, the energy sector, one of the country's economic pillars, has absorbed losses totaling $78.5 billion over 3 years. More than 460 companies have exited the Russian market, further reshaping the economic landscape. For a time, increased state spending created the appearance of resilience. A war-driven economy generated short-term growth, but that momentum is now slowing. Projections from the World Economic Outlook estimate growth at 1.4% in 2025 and 1.2% in 2026. Data reported on October 30th shows that Russia has already entered its third consecutive quarter of economic slowdown, with just 1% growth recorded in the first 9 months of 2025, over 4 times slower than the same period in 2024. Inside Russia, the social dynamics of the war have also shifted. Economist Vladislav Inozemtsev introduced the concept of deathnomics, describing how financial incentives linked to military service created what some observers call an artificial middle class. For a period, these incentives reshaped household decisions, offering income opportunities tied directly to participation in the conflict. But as losses increase, that dynamic is changing. What may once have been viewed as an economic opportunity is now increasingly seen through a lens of risk and uncertainty. The scale of ongoing losses is altering public perception, gradually reshaping attitudes toward the war. Meanwhile, Ukraine has expanded its operational reach. Strikes targeting energy infrastructure, including oil refineries, have introduced new pressures inside Russia, contributing to fuel shortages and rising prices. These developments illustrate how the conflict is no longer confined to frontline engagements, but is influencing broader economic stability. All of this stands in stark contrast to early expectations. In 2014, claims circulated that Ukraine could be subdued within 2 weeks. Today, more than a decade later, that timeline has stretched into nearly 4 years of continuous conflict, an outcome few initially anticipated. Despite these realities, there are few clear signs of an imminent shift in political direction. U.S. intelligence assessments reported by NBC News suggest that President Putin remains firmly committed to his objectives, with little indication of willingness to compromise. This entrenched position continues to shape both military strategy and economic policy. Beyond Ukraine, the geopolitical consequences are equally profound. Rather than weakening NATO, the conflict has strengthened the alliance. Finland and Sweden have joined, expanding NATO's presence in the Baltic region and addressing long-standing strategic gaps. Member states have also committed to increasing defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, while reinforcing their eastern positions and investing in new technologies, including drone systems. Even in scenarios where Russia achieves further territorial advances, the long-term outlook remains complex. Reports suggest that in 2025, Russian forces gained approximately 1% of Ukraine's territory. At that pace, achieving full control would take decades, far exceeding any short-term strategic horizon. Public sentiment within Ukraine adds another layer of uncertainty. Polling consistently indicates that a large majority of Ukrainians reject outcomes involving external control or influence. This suggests that even in the event of territorial changes, resistance could persist through non-conventional means, prolonging instability. On the strategic level, nuclear signaling has also played a role. However, NATO's continued position as a nuclear-capable alliance reinforces the principle of mutually assured destruction, limiting the practical impact of such threats. Taken together, the picture that emerges is one of mounting costs and diminishing returns. Russia faces sustained losses in personnel and equipment, increasing economic pressure, and a shifting global landscape that has, in many ways, moved against its original goals. Because in a war defined by endurance, the ultimate outcome may not be decided by a single, decisive moment, but by how long each side can sustain the path they have chosen. And if you want to stay ahead of every development, every shift,